all of this shit that we struggle with, the relationship with the body, the relationship with food, people pleasing, perfectionism, is a disconnection from who we are. So the goal in my program is to reconnect to you, right? And there's a way to reconnect to you, which I will talk about. Welcome to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, the podcast where we debunk the eat less, move more, shrink more mentality and focus on what really matters, which includes your relationship with your body, food, self-worth, and the behaviors that align with all of those. I'm your host, Christina Hathaway, licensed therapist with specialized training in food and body obsession, certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. At the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, we believe what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. So let's have a conversation about that. Before we get into today's episode, I want to make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, if you don't want to miss any content that's being dropped, make sure you hit that notification bell as well. I also want to know who are the people you want to hear from on this show and what topics would you like me to continue to cover. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now, let's get into the episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast. I'm so excited that you took this time out for yourself to learn something about your physical and mental health. So congratulations. Give yourself a little patsies on the backsies. We are still back to the basics, speaking of backs, and we are talking about your inner critic parts. Now, I say parts because I have a certain education and training in a type of therapy called internal family systems. And I want to explain it to you because I think it's so important in regards to how we look at how we speak to ourselves. And we're going to identify not only the inner critic, but the parts of us in our brain that are both proactive in how we control and the ones that are reactive in how we control. Because oftentimes, as you'll notice, people think the reactive parts are the ones that are the problem, when really they're just a solution to a burnt out proactive part, which you'll understand here. Please stay tuned. This is really important because when I can help clients identify this, it is a game changer. I have seen clients see like life-changing change in one session doing this work. It's insane. So I really hope you stay around for this because as we're talking about back to the basics, we've discussed the subconscious mind, right? We've discussed how your self-worth was created, right? We've discussed your relationship with food, exercise, and so many things. What I want you to understand is all of these things play onto each other. And what we're talking about today is the specifics around what you hear in your head. So we've talked about the subconscious pull back to what's comfortable, but now we're going to name and naming. So the mindset method has 4 steps. Know, which is understanding our subconscious mind, understanding the way we speak to ourselves, understanding how we got here, understanding our boundary system and our relationship with body, food, things like that. And then name. And name is where we name our parts. We also name our body's needs and we name our boundary system. So then it's notice, which is going to be something we talk about in the last episode, and nurture. So putting those all in one episode. So I really like to teach this, and you guys have heard me talk about this before. We're going to do a very similar coaching practice when we go through this, understanding the parts and how what we focus on most of the time, like binge eating, anger, even addiction, is not the actual problem. It's the solution to a problem. So we will get into that. So when it comes to your inner critic, it is that voice that is just so, so loud. And for so many of my clients walking in, they feel powerless to their inner critic. They say, I just can't. That voice is so loud. It just pulls me back in and pulls me back in. So the inner critic is the character that represents the mental resistance that our brains create when we are trying to make change. Now, that mental resistance can simply be being critical of the self, being so critical that you can't do it, that you just give up and pull back to your old default ways. It can also sound in ways that we would consider good for us too. And consider like character, like positive aspects of our character. And we don't realize that that's still a critical voice, because oftentimes these critical voices are all based in us trying to protect ourselves from other people seeing our deepest, darkest flaws. So these critical voices are there for us to say, like, whether it's a critical voice, it's like, I'm going to talk shit to myself first, so if someone else does it, it's less of a blow. A perfectionistic voice that tries to control by, trying to control everything and making everything perfect. It could be a hypervigilant voice, making sure that you're always looking for the bad thing to happen. It could be a caretaking voice. If I'm getting accolades from other people, then I'm good. And you guys have heard me touch on these things in the past episodes. But I want you to recognize that the inner critic and the perfectionist and the hypervigilant one and my critical voice is my hyper independence. Like, I'll do it myself, right? Also, though, there's a part of you that explodes from that. Explodes because that inner critic, that hypervigilance, hyper independence gets tired, because it's not truly who you are. It's not the self, which we're going to have a whole episode on, and I'm going to touch on it today. It's not the self. And eventually, because it's not the self, it's almost like if you were just like constantly performing, you'd get tired of that. And what ends up happening is the reactive voices, or sometimes don't even sound like voices, they're just actions, reactions, right? And those are things like rage. Those are like snapping at people, turning to food to cope. They're turning to alcohol, drugs to cope. For me, it's abandoning and just being like, fuck it, I'll do it. Like, not only will I do it myself, I'm going to almost like shame you for not doing it for me. I can have some bouts of like snappiness myself. There's a lot of, self-harm is a part of that side of things. So once you walk away today, you'll be able to hopefully pick apart your parts and understand which one is proactive and which one's reactive. So let me just give you a little history lesson. I want to talk about internal family systems. Stay with me. I promise that you're going to learn something from this. But internal family systems was developed by Richard Schwartz in the 1980s. And he based this on this premise that we have that the human mind has like natural multiple parts, okay? And he called them subpersonalities, or parts work. And he believed that our distress in our minds are actually maladaptive interactions among our parts versus pathology. So what does that mean? You're like, what? Huh? So this idea of us having these different parts of us that aren't working in harmony. And once I explain it, you're gonna be like, that makes perfect sense. And you've already touched on it, right? We've talked about subconscious versus conscious. Like, think of those as two parts. Now, what we're going to talk about today is even dissecting those down even more. And this maladaptive interaction between, and I'll explain the parts here, the self, right? That's who we truly are. And your proactive parts or reactive parts causes you to have these, what looks like pathology or mental illness, right? Disordered eating, body image issues, body dysmorphia, right? And now listen, I'm not talking about those people who have true mental illness. And even then, though, because I have my ADHD part, right? I have my dissociation part, and I can recognize them once I know who they are. But that obviously takes the work that we're going to talk about today. When we have severe mental illness, it's different. And that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about, the type of mental struggles that I truly believe once we understand them and the true them, not just the outcome of them. Because everywhere you guys look, we're looking at the outcome. We're looking at the binge eating. We're looking at the weight gain. We're looking at the overtraining. And we're trying to change that. And I want you to understand one very, very important thing that you're probably like, I've already heard this. Your beliefs dictate your behaviors. Your behaviors dictate your outcomes. Your outcomes make you feel emotion that then only makes the belief stronger or weaker. Okay. So in regards to IFS, it explains that we have like multiple parts. Now, you're probably thinking, do I have multiple personality disorder? No, that's not what he's talking about. But the way I like to explain it is Dick Schwartz did something brilliant. He looked at people's families and said, how does each of these individuals play out in your mind? And I think that's what it's called, internal family systems, because I can say, okay, that's that person, and not every part of me, because sometimes you'll see yourself acting opposite of someone in your family. But it's that concept of systems theory, which I talked about, which is the type of therapy I do, which is looking at the entire system rather than one person. It also is rooted in attachment theory, trauma research, and mindfulness practices. So what I love about this and why I bring it into my coaching practice and why I want you guys as listeners to understand it is it removes you as the like sick person or the person with the problem. And that's that. And it takes away this, usually you have this therapist-client relationship where the therapist kind of reparents the client so then they can reparent themselves. That's not how this one works. It says you have everything that you need to create change in your life. You've always had it. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn for yourself, or whatever that quote is. Love that quote. I love this because it takes, obviously people hire me to help support them, but I kind of just push across the table. I'm like, you have this in you. Let's find it. My job is to help them find this stuff and then create change in themselves, which is what we call a non-pathologizing framework. All parts, interestingly, are inherently adaptive and they're always there. So his book is called No Bad Parts. They've always been there, right? And our mind, when these parts are just acting neutrally, they're good. They help us. They support us. It's only when they become extreme. And when they become extreme, it's because they've developed, as we talked about in self-worth, throughout our life experiences, our childhood. Particularly, they become extreme under stress or trauma. So that's really important to know. In addition to the reactive and proactive, as I mentioned, we have the self. And I'm going to do a whole episode on the self and how we reconnect to ourselves, because all of this shit that we struggle with, the relationship with the body, the relationship with food, people pleasing, perfectionism, is a disconnection from who we are. So the goal in my program is to reconnect to you, right? And there's a way to reconnect to you, which I will talk about. But just to plant this seed now, when we are acting from ourselves, because so many of my clients are like, I don't even know who I am. When we are acting from ourselves, Dick Schwartz has, and I love that he does this because, I like a little rhyme, a little creative something to help you remember things. He created the 8 C's. When we are working from ourself, we are calm, we have clarity or clearness, we are curious, we are compassionate, we have confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. Now I'm going to go through all of that in the next episode, so pay attention to that. All of those things are a guide, but most of the time we're not. We're not calm. We're freaking out. We don't have clarity. We are just doing and not understanding why we do things. We're not curious. We're critical, right? We don't have compassion. We have demands towards ourselves. We're not confident. We feel very insecure. We're not courageous because we're not trying to do anything differently, so we just stay the same. We're definitely not being creative and thinking, oh, there's probably another way I could do this. We're just doing as we normally do, and we're not connected at all because whatever it is we're doing usually disconnects us from our body. So I love this model. And again, we're talking about the inner critic, but I'm here to teach you guys, like, you have more than one. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. You have more than one. But just coming back to the self is stable. Okay. It's non-reactive. So we have reactive, proactive, non-reactive. It's a non-reactive state of consciousness and functions as like your internal leader. Now, I always come back to babies because I think they're so brilliant. They are connected to themselves, the self, because you'll see them. They will get their needs met. They know when they like someone, when they don't like someone. They know when they're hungry, when they're not hungry. They know how to move and when to move, right? And like you'll see them crawling, walking, playing, creativity, right? Like there's that part of them is always there until they learn through stress and trauma to create these subparts of them. Get it? Okay. That's the self. And that's ultimately, like I said, we want to get to. Now, the parts, however, are autonomous mental subsets, okay? Or subunits. They hold a lot of emotion. They hold a lot of cognitive distortions, memories, beliefs, and behavioral strategies, as we'll call them, or just shitty behavior that we end up acting from, okay? They again kind of interact with each other dynamically. Some of them support each other to get you to this outcome. Some of them work against each other to get to this outcome, but they very much are working either together or separate to influence your perception of things and, of course, your behavior. Okay? So in IFS specifically, this is gonna trip you guys up. So listen. In IFS, he explains parts in his way. In TMOM, the Mindset of Matter, or the Mindset Mirror Connection, I explain it differently. Because for me, I like to see pictures in my mind. It helps me understand things better. Not to say that's for you, but I created new names. So this is where you're going to get confused. So I'm going to go over this twice. When I talk about, so in IFS, he uses the word exile, whereas for me, I use the word dungeon. In IFS, he uses the word managers, where in my rendition, I use the word wardens. In IFS, he uses firefighters, and in my little picture, I use guard dogs. So I'm telling you guys this. Number one, I did not make this up. I just changed the names, and I'm not taking claim for what's behind the premise of this, so don't come at me. For me, it helped. I just like the cohesiveness of the way that I put it together. But if you see IFS somewhere else, or you have a therapist who does IFS, you're going to hear exiles, managers, and firefighters. Here on my show and in my program, you're going to hear dungeons, wardens, and guard dogs. So let's get into it, shall we? So we talked about proactive, reactive. We talked about the self. Now I'm going to elaborate on both the parts, but why? Why do these parts happen? Well, I want you to think of a dungeon. And what goes into the dungeon? The worst of the worst, like solitary confinement, the worst of the worst. We almost lock them up and throw away the key. We don't want them to come out. And in IFS, we talk about the dungeon, again, that's the name I made up, as the part that carries the emotional pain, shame, trauma memory, fear, and unmet attachment needs. This is your shit. This is the shit that you don't want anybody to see. I have so many clients wonder, like, well, I don't do this with anyone but my partner, because that's the most vulnerable relationship next to your parent that you have. And because most of the time you expose them to parts of your dungeon, maybe you don't. Maybe you're exposed to all. I don't know your story. You feel even more vulnerable with them. And that's why a lot of these parts are kicked up more with your partner. You'll hear that. So the characteristic of the things that are in our dungeon are often created from our early lives, which we talked about in the self-worth episode. And again, they're associated with like high vulnerability. Like it is exposure to the nth degree. You are exposed, you are vulnerable, and because of that, you're emotionally intense. Everything in there is emotionally intensified. So think about that, guys. What's in your dungeon? What are you, when you think about it right now, feel shame, feel guilt. Now, pause that thought before you say it. Don't think about it if you're driving or like you're in a mood, and like if it's big shit, let's keep it in the dungeon and then we'll expose that in therapy. But at least understanding, like having an understanding of it. When I think about stuff in my life that I carried a lot of shame for, I would feel it when I was thinking about it. I would feel the shame as if it was happening to me again. Whereas now I don't feel that. I get a little bit of it. Like I can feel my breath, like the fluidity of my breath change right when I was talking about that. So maybe there's a little bit there, but you know, we're always still healing from these things, and they kind of come up in different ways during different times of our lives. But the dungeon is full of that that could be so many things. It could be abuse. It could be physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse. It could be abandonment or perceived abandonment. It could be criticism, which would be emotional abuse. It could be death, which would be an abandonment in some sense. It could even be the opposite. It could be a parent who had no boundaries with you, who was a helicopter parent, right? It could be a parent who, again, perfectionism, all the things we talked about in the self-worth episode. But the thing about what we create about ourselves because of those situations, and the worst of the worst parts of that, we hide. We hide them and we suppress them. We isolate these parts of us to prevent, not only preventing exposure of our true selves, but also preventing potential overwhelm. What do I mean about exposure to our true selves? Well, you're imperfect. And I want you to think about like what's in your dungeon is very young. Why? Because it happened very young. And it was created out of a very young mind. But you've been thinking this for so long that like you don't want anyone else to see it. The exiles are very young, and when they get activated, they can produce such strong emotional responses in the body. Things like panic attacks, things like severe depression, grief, of course, and an overall like lack of worth or worthlessness. Worthlessness and hopelessness are the two emotions and state of being that are very scary as someone who's worked as a therapist for over 15 years. Very scary. Most people don't expose you to that. I have had the pleasure, and I will say pleasure, of being exposed to that, because once that's exposed, I can help. Even before it's exposed, I can help. But the greater trust that my clients have in me to expose what's in their dungeon, we can use their adult mind to say, wow, I'm safe now. Like, I'm not going to get hurt anymore, or whatever that looks like. So that is your dungeon. Think, throw away the key. Now, any good prison, any prison has a warden, right? And a warden in a prison kind of oversees everything, make sure everything is running smoothly. And in my rendition of IFS, the wardens are the proactive protector parts. They attempt to prevent the exiles from being exposed or being triggered. So how do they do this? They operate from control through planning, through perfectionism, through criticism, through avoidance, through hypervigilance, through independence. There are so many ways that we control. Narcissism could be a part of this, right? This grandiose personality to control how other people feel around us. So you can hear, guys, there's like the planner, positive. Oh, she's a perfectionist, positive, right? Versus the narcissist, versus the inner critic. They all live in the same proactive arena. The goal, as we talked about, is to seek predictability and safety. And oftentimes, a lot of these parts, as I've mentioned, are socially reinforced, because they come from a state of control. You think type A, you think rule follower, again, perfectionist, right? She's so hard on herself. You're your biggest critic. But like, no one's thinking like, this is harmful. This is harmful to this person. Like, I hear parents tell me about their kids when they were kids, and I'm like, that's not normal. But we make it normal. Right? We make it normal that this kid's so hard on herself and she just wants to do everything perfectly. It's like, yeah, well, I'm working with a kid now who is that person and has gotten to the point of trying to hurt themselves, you know, and that's not where we want to go with that. So your inner critic, your overachiever, your rule follower, your super independent, that's my little independent girl, my little strong girl. Those are all proactive parts, and I call them the warden. Okay. And as I mentioned, these parts of you get exhausted. So let me go through a few of my parts. It's funny because I have parts in addition, because like some of the parts I experience are in myself, like by myself. Whereas other parts obviously are relational. So Mark and I did, I think I told you guys, we did a relationship intensive. It was really cool. And it was with an IFS therapist. And I'm trying to remember. I had the caretaker part came up in me, or was it hyper independence? They kind of so my hyper independence and my caretaker are like homies. They are besties. And my caretaker part says, like, no one's going to take care of me. I've got to take care of myself. I take care of everyone else, right? So if I'm taking care of everyone else, no one's taking care of me. But in my brain, taking care of everyone else was my way to get love, right? To receive love. And I want to keep feeling unlovable or having conditional love in my dungeon, right? So I have that caretaker part, but the problem though is that caretaker part puts me in a position for the hyper independent part to come out. Because again, if I'm taking care of everyone else, no one's taking care of me. Therefore, I have to do it myself. And that becomes so exhausting to be doing for everyone else, to then be also feel like no one's going to show up for you and you have to do it yourself. So then what ends up happening is what we'll talk about next in the reactive parts. That was happened in my relationship. In my personal brain, I have a hypervigilant part. I am always looking. It is funny, you guys, because I don't even feel anxious doing it. It's just a thing I do. Now, I think I've told you guys this. I've had my life threatened 3 times by another person. First one, when I was a kid, I was with my cousin in Arkansas, and his girlfriend pulled a knife on us. I was like young. The second was I was held up at gunpoint, being robbed at my job when I was 15. And then the third one was with my girlfriends, where this guy attacked us in a parking lot with a knife, went to stab my friend. Another friend hit the knife. She cut her hand. We ended up getting out and driving away because the windows were down. And it's funny because I ended up being the person like controlling that situation because I had been so traumatized multiple times before then. And I didn't really I didn't grow up in a nice part of town. Like my parents obviously provided for us, but I wasn't a troublemaker. I was actually more of a rule follower. But I remember now none of the things that I got, none of those situations were me like hanging out with the wrong crowd. Actually, I was working. I was with my girlfriends in San Diego. And I was a kid, So for me, I had that hypervigilance part because it's just like looking, checking things out. And that's exhausting too, right? So the resentment starts to set in with the hyper-independent part. The exhaustion of constantly be on the search sets in from the hypervigilant part. But again, these are all proactive. Hypervigilance creates safety, right? Hyperindependence creates needs being met, and caretaking creates love, right? So if those things are happening, I'm avoiding the dungeon. It's when those things stop happening for me, whether it's people not appreciating the things you do for them, you getting, again, exhausted by having to meet your own needs, or getting exhausted by having to constantly be on the search, that the walls start coming down. Or I think, actually, let's do it the other way. The gate starts coming up from that dungeon, right? And then what happens? They let out the guard dogs. They say, oh shit, the gate's opening from the dungeon. The dogs come in, rah, 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 rah. Pounce. Get that fucking dungeon closed immediately. And dungeons happen when we are tired, when we are exhausted of working from these proactive parts. The dungeon are reactive, protective. Both are protective parts that respond when the dungeon is activated, and they're there for managerial control. They are there for chaos control. They focus on immediate emotional relief. They are very, very impulsive and sometimes numbing. They very much can shut you down. And they operate without regard to long-term consequences. Hear that again. I want to read those characteristics again. Focus on immediate emotional relief, use impulsive or numbing behaviors, and operate without regard to long-term consequences. So let's go back to your girl. Caretaker part and hyper independence, tire out, and then I'm just a bitch. Straight up. I'm just like, fuck you. You're not going to do it for me. I'll do it myself. Or another reactive part is like, I get critical of them. Where I'm like, well, why did you do that? Well, that's a dumb idea. I mean, this is probably the worst reactive part I have, and I hate it. I just like want to prove people wrong, you know? And then for my hypervigilance part, I don't actually know what my reactive part to that is. I don't know. I have to do some work on that. So there you go. There's work I can do. We're going to go through a little something for you guys to connect to these parts. But examples of examples of your guard dogs. Remember that guard dog is seeing that gate come up of that dungeon, and it's like, not on my watch, baby. Rah, 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 right? And it just attacks. Include substance abuse, binge eating, dissociation, compulsive behaviors, and emotional shutdown. I also emotionally shut down at times too. So that is another thing that I love to do. I've got a lot. I mean, look at, I'm sharing all these of myself to you guys to understand yourselves. Because once you're like, oh, it's not just this inner critic, right? You think you have these like two voices, like the angel and the devil. No, babe, you got a whole like community of people in your head and yourself in the middle. So we have like proactive part on one shoulder, reactive parts on the other shoulder, and then the self somewhere in the middle. So the interesting thing, the other word that I want you guys to focus on is that your your wardens and your guard dogs both function to protect you from your most wounded, most insecure parts of yourself. And I love that. While I don't like how it happens, I love that they're there to protect you. Why do I love that? Well, for so many of us, we have been criticized by other people or by society, not directly, just like, through messaging, that what we do is wrong, that we're bad. Now, even harm to self, even the trigger warning, taking of our own life, right? A lot of people, obviously, there is a lot of negative connotation with that. But in internal family systems theory, we see that as the greatest form of relief, right? Which is a reactive part. The need of that part is to find relief. And what we see is very negative in regards to self-harm or worse. In IFS, we don't say that's bad. Because remember, there's no bad parts. We say that was the ultimate form of relief. Okay? And I know that's going to be hard for a lot of people to hear. But I wanted to share that extreme with you because we don't see it that way. It was the ultimate form of relief from most likely a very, very exhausted proactive part. Right? Because the work in that dungeon hasn't been done. We didn't clean out the dungeon. We've got to clean out the dungeon. And now in my program, we don't clean out the dungeon. We understand the dungeon, but cleaning out the dungeon, I'd say for some people we could do it, but for people who have a lot of trauma like myself, I'm going to do that in a therapeutic setting where I'm with somebody because I do therapy on the computer, but at least having somebody there to, if anything comes up, if we feel any panic, if we, kind of shut down, like that's really important. So I want to say that too. Like if you're someone listening to this and you're like, I'm going to do what she tells me to do in the next, few minutes and I'm going to cure myself. Please don't. If you have an excessive history of trauma, work with an IFS therapist directly. Okay. So I just want to say that. Where was I? Oh yeah. Protection. Ultimate form of protection. And when we can see our behaviors, binge eating specifically, as a solution to a greater problem, the restriction, the perfection around food, right? The longing, the anxiety, and the immense focus on how you look is your proactive part. Because if I can just look this way, then I'm good. I don't have to feel the shame. I don't have to feel the guilt. I don't have to feel the grief. If I just look skinny, then I'm good. So that's a proactive part, right? And all of the behaviors that are involved in that. However, normally because it's very restrictive, it's very focused on like rigid rules and thinking and perfectionism, that then we get exhausted from it and boom, that reactive part of binging takes over. The problem again with reactive parts or your guard dogs is that they have no long-term consequence. So we end up feeling shame again. So that dungeon door starts to creep up again, and then the warden says, let's come back down, and then we repeat. Your wardens attempt to prevent while your guard dogs attempt to suppress. So what do I do in my life that helps me prevent me feeling negative about myself, me feeling low self-worth, me feeling grief, shame, whatever those things? And then there's a difference, right? So what do I do to prevent that versus what I do to push that down and suppress that? Those are very, very different. And it's really important to understand, like, what are the behaviors, thoughts, and well, not really emotions, behaviors and thoughts that help me prevent experiencing the worst parts of myself versus suppress the worst parts of myself. And oftentimes what we see is like these parts are so polarized from who we really are. And that's where the symptoms or the behaviors come out. What does that mean? I'm just going to reiterate this one more time because to me, it's just so important. We are worthy. We are worthy. We can meet our own needs and we can have our needs met by other people. It's called interdependence, right? However, because of everything that we've experienced, we don't believe in our worth. And the self is worthy, just as is. And our parts become so good at proving that we're worthy that we think that that's the way that it's supposed to go, but they're so polarizing to who we are because we were already enough before them. Now remember, these parts have always existed, but before we were worthy enough before they became extreme, but they don't believe that. They're like, nope. You didn't get your need met there. So we've got to keep going to get your need met, right? To show you're worthy. That's the very important part of this is you always had it in you, my dear. Okay. So let's go into a little bit of parts work. So if you are driving, don't do this now. As I mentioned, if you are someone who has significant trauma, let's probably not get into this, but I just want you to think about a type of thinking that you have that feels, when I say overwhelming or you're finding yourself doing it often, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like extreme, is like very, very overwhelming, it's like a 3, right? So for me, I would say my 3 is controlling food when I have like multiple meals out. Like I'm not really that concerned with it anymore, but I still kind of question it. So this kind of planning ahead and like needing to feel like I have control over the food, it's definitely not a 10 anymore. Thank you, Jesus. But what is a thought pattern or maybe a voice or even a feeling that feels 3 out of 10 overwhelming for you? Now, I want you to think about the last time you experienced that feeling or thought pattern. And as you're thinking about it, I want you to bring yourself back to that scenario. So for me, it was yesterday and I was planning a very busy week and trying to get my mom to tell me where we were going to eat for this event. And she was like, I don't know. I'll surprise you. And I felt a little like irk in my body. Irk, ick, whichever. So that was yesterday. So as you're going back to your situation, come back to what was happening. And then I want you to scan your body. I want you to see where you hold whatever feeling you're having. Like, where do you feel tightness, tension, any shift when you're thinking about that past experience? Where do you feel that shift? Okay. Now I want you to focus on that part of your body And you could put your hand on it. You could just really like dive into it, really focus in on that part of your body. And I want you to name what it feels like. So for me, the word control popped into my head. That's a controlling part. And as we do this activity, you might get to know it a bit more. But the question I want you to ask yourself is, as I'm focusing on the part of my body, as I'm focusing on the thoughts that I was having, what are you feeling towards this part? Do you find yourself hating it? Do you find yourself wanting to learn more about it? Really focus on how you feel towards it. For those of you who are thinking, I want to learn more. Christina's opened me up. I want to learn more. I want you to continue. For those of you who are like, I fucking hate this. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm going to ask you to sit this one out and just listen. Because the way that we approach our parts is incredibly important. When we approach them from hate, any sort of negativity, what do you think is going to happen to a vulnerable part? What if I came up to you and I was like, I hate you. You'd be like, who are you, lady? Get out of my face. Your parts are the same. When we can open them up to curiosity and compassion, two of the C's, they're more likely to open up to us, just like a human being. Okay? So just listen if you're that person. For those of you who are still going, let's keep going. So I'm approaching this part with curiosity, and I want you to ask this part, how long have you been doing this job for me? And just listen to what it says. Next, I want you to ask it, what are you afraid of would happen if you did not do this job for me? Very important question. Now, if you start to find yourself answering the questions through logic, ask logic to move to the side. Let the part speak. It will speak. Just ask logic. That's a different part. Move it to the side. Let it speak. Next, I want you to ask it, what triggers you to take the driver wheel? Or you can ask it, what triggers you to, step up? Understand its triggers. Okay. Next, I want you to ask it how old it thinks that you are. And it might surprise you. You can also tell it your actual age and see its response. Next question. What is it that I need to do to show you that you're safe to take a step back? Or what do you need to see me do to be safe enough to not have to do your job or move away from your job? And just listen for the answer. Lastly, you're going to ask it, is there anything else you'd like me to know about you? And just see what it says. Take a deep breath. Let it out. I want you to thank that part and let it know that you've learned a lot from it, that you're grateful for it, and come back to me. I'm curious to hear what you guys heard. To go over those questions, what is it like? Why do you do the job that you do for me? That's going to give you insight to what it thinks will happen if it's like what it's protecting you from, right? And whatever came up, it'll tell you what it's protecting you from. Then what are the triggers? So obviously, what are the scenarios where it feels like it needs to step up? Because remember, we have multiple parts, and different parts are going to pop up for different triggers. Then what do you need me to do in order for you to step aside or like go into the passenger seat? What do you need me to do in order for you to come out of this extreme version of yourself or step aside? That is incredibly important because that's most likely the thing that you're not doing that you need to do in order to connect back to the self. The answer to this question for a lot of clients is so profound. I need to let go. I need to relax. I need to give in. I need to stop performing, right? My hyper independent self, I remember it was interesting because eventually I turned into like my younger self. And I was playing with Liberty in Harlem, my little girl, like I can see her. And it was Mark and myself standing next to each other, watching her, right? And like allowing her to be cared for. I need to allow care in my life. And it wasn't just me watching her. My husband was next to me, because remember, this was a couples intensive. So I hope you start to understand and have compassion towards even that really shitty voice in your head. It's there to protect you. And I know I've talked about this on this podcast before, but it can feel really weird to accept that. And once you can accept it and start learning, you can recreate back to your, or reconnect back to the self. And when we're in our self, baby, we are unstoppable, because we are meeting our own needs. We're keeping ourselves safe, loved, creating autonomy, creating identity, growth, variety, stimulation. We are creating those emotional needs. We're doing it with safe people as well, right? Because interdependence is I can do it myself and also ask for help. When you are connected to the self, as we'll talk about in the next episode, you're unstoppable. But we have to learn the parts. We have to understand what it is they're protecting us from, what's in that dungeon, then be able to let go and reconnect back to you. Once you do that, sky's the limit. So I hope you guys really took from this episode. You can see kind of the layers kind of coming off. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty. We're naming the parts. If you're interested in doing this work around your relationship with your body, food, diet, exercise, we're still going to go there, because so many of you struggle with taking care of yourself, whether that's the person who overdoes it or underdoes it, or does the all or nothing, right? It all has to do with these parts. Because whatever it is that you're probably trying to change, right? You're probably trying to change the binge eating. You're probably trying to change the nothing, or the shutdown that happens after you make a mistake. That's not the thing we actually have to change. We have to change a couple steps before that. So if you're interested, check out the show notes below. I have a few openings, so you can work with me directly and one-to-one. Or if not me, with one of my coaches. So check out the Clarity Call link. You'll have a conversation with me. I'm really interested for you to do this work, because it's the work you've never done. You've tried all the other stuff, and now it is time. It is time for you to experience a new side of yourself that you knew existed, but you never thought you had control over. So I encourage that. I also encourage you, if you like this episode, to share it with people. Share it with your friend group, your book club, whomever it is. Just say, hey, check out this chick. She looks at diet and exercise just a bit differently. I would love that. Book clubs, what's up? If you also really enjoyed this, comment below. What did your part say to you? What was an aha moment? What was something positive? Then also, if you really like this episode, 5-star rating and review would be fantastic. I want all reviews in 2026 underneath my Apple podcast, where you can see them. You can actually see what people write. So that's it. Yeah, your parts. Stay tuned for the self part of this, because it is the fourth part in the dungeon. The warden and the guard dogs is the self, right? The inmate, if you will. Stay tuned for that episode, and I'll let you get on your way. Just reminding you that what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. Bye-bye.